It's episode 3 of the Improv London podcast. This week's guest is Michael Such.
This ain't gonna be easy.
Somebody moving around.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Improv London podcast. Having started from the idea that I'm making this for myself, and if anyone else likes it, that's a bonus, which is still true, and it's still the conversations that I have with people that is the really important bit. But it turns out I've been seeking validation from the numbers of people that have listened to this podcast. So, thank you very much to the 75 people that have listened to episode 1 with Steve Rowe, and thank you very much to the 41 people that listened to last week's episode with Stephen Davidson and Christelle Claudette. You've made my life valid, and if that means I'm a sad person because I need your validation, well, that's just the truth, and that's what improv's all about. Anyway, this week's guest is great. Michael, I've only met once before at a Hoopla improvised rap workshop, but I think you'll find what he has to say about improv and role-playing and the spaces in between really interesting. I know I really enjoyed listening back to this conversation. Anyway, here we go.
I learned to improvise.
Okay. Do you want to do a sound test?
Not really.
Okay.
This is the sound test.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So no. Yeah. Do you want to just explain to me what you've given me here? This is really interesting.
Yeah, so there's a guy in Australia, I can't remember his name, who started a blog called 1,000+ Coffees.
Right.
With the aim of having a coffee with all of his 1,000+ Facebook friends, and he's making a blog about it. So I thought that would be a nice idea just to do as a project. So I've started on that. So I don't have a blog. I don't blog. So I think the way I'm recording it mainly is getting people to make me small pieces of art on these little mini canvases.
Wow.
And then it's not up now, but I'm gonna put them all up on my wall as sort of a nice reminder of all the people I know, all my Facebook friends. I've done about 25 people, I think, so far. Yeah, it's really interesting because I think just the act of because of how Facebook friends work, you can add someone after meeting them a couple of times, or
Meeting them once at a Hoopla improvised rap workshop, for example.
Yeah. On sale, no, only £45. Yeah, or only meet them in group situations is other common thing, and so the act of sitting down with someone, even for half an hour, just the two of you, and is really good and useful because it moves your relationship on a different way.
That's really interesting because that's also what I'm doing with this podcast.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's people that I've met that I like, that share this interest in improv. But as you say, you sort of get to meet them in a group, and maybe you'll chat to them a little bit afterwards. But the actual chance to sit down for sort of 45 minutes to an hour, talk shop, it's really interesting, the parallels between the two.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Well, I've got this little square of white canvas, and I'm going to consider what I'm going to put on it. That's really exciting. Thank you very much for that. Cool. Right. There are loads of things we can talk about.
Sure.
But what I thought would be interesting to do is to explore improv and kind of role playing and story gaming and things like that, and sort of what your personal journey is, where you started off, and then kind of explore how the two are maybe similar and different, and then talk about your collaboration with the Nursery and Open Roads, and we'll just, wherever it takes us, sort of thing. But
yeah, sure. That sounds good to me.
And I'm going to try and talk as little as possible because I realise I have a finite amount of things that I say. I'm really worried that every single recording I've done I've said the same things. Just goes to show I just have 12 things that I say, so I'm trying not to use those up.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So, which was it for you first? Where did you start with, I don't know, the realm of imagination?
The realm of imagination. I think it's like maybe 3 years ago. I think I started with role playing, and I still the main group I go to is a London indie RPG meet. So that was the beginning of my journey in some sense. And then 2 years ago, I started doing improv. I started out with Imprology, Remy Bertrand, and trained with him for a while. And I've also done courses with the Nursery and with Hoopla as well. And a few random jams and drop-ins like everyone else.
Cool. So when you say role-playing, what do you mean by role-playing?
That's a good question.
Because the indie meet is quite a very specific part. It's
Subgenre.
yeah.
Subgenre.
So
yeah.
not only a subgenre of a subgenre is exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think. So basically, there's sort of two types of role playing, really, in very broad terms. This is so basically everything I say in the next 10 minutes. Like someone on the internet will hate me massively. So please don't take it as a definitive account. So I think there's two types, which is tabletop role playing and live action or role playing games or LARP. Both of those are about creating a story, or not necessarily a story, creating an experience with a group of people, like you might do in improv. The massive difference between improv and all role playing is that it's not an audience. So tabletop role playing is where you sit around a table with a group of friends and invent a story, and you tell the story like you might retell the memory of your going out last night. So you'd speak the dialogue and then you just describe the actions. So you might say, I got in present tense. So you say, like, I go over the table and pick up the glass, or something like that. Live action role playing is where you're inhabiting the characters. I think the most concise definition of that is really make believe for adults. Cool. So, like when you were a kid, you played cowboys and Indians, and yeah, you dressed up and ran around. It's exactly like that, but done by adults. So there was actually a Western LARP, which I think is run a couple of times in Czech Republic, called what's it called? You can edit this bit. Alright, anyway.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. Hell on Wheels, that's what it's called. Yeah. So it's like that, but obviously doing it as an adult changes the themes and the focus. And then I can sort of dig into sub-genre if you want me to dig into sub-genre. Sure.
Well, when you... because I imagine that people's route into role-playing is... Well, I mean, some people probably go straight to indie gaming.
Yeah.
Did you go straight to indie gaming, or did you start with trad gaming? Because I've broken down the definitions even further there.
Yeah, sure,
We should really explain what trad gaming is first, shouldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, I meant to say that, so for tabletop role-playing games, the sort of canonical and first, really, example is Dungeons and Dragons. So that is what is sometimes called a traditional role-playing game. They're the sort of more mass market and tend to focus on like fantasy or science fiction themes. And it's kind of like similar to movies, really. Like, you know, Lord of the Rings is a massive movie, and comic book movies are massive movies. Those, in some ways, are defined by two other things apart from the traditional things. One is they tend to have a larger number of rules, and rules involving rolling dice, and like how you, and what that's used for is like combat. So, say your character goes over and tries to hit an orc with a sword, then there'll be some set of rules to determine whether you do that or not. And then the other thing is, I think it's important in the traditional and indie role-playing game divide is presence of a game master. So in Dungeons and Dragons, each player, this player plays just their character, and generally they're like a group of people doing a thing together, like 3 or 4 players, and then there's someone else who's playing the game master or GM, and they're responsible for describing the rest of the world, like, and the environments they encounter. And it's some ways it's like a dialogue between the players and the GM. And traditional games tend to have GMs. And then the other, maybe it's not necessarily, obviously it's not a binary, but another style of tabletop role playing games are indie, as in indie music. So they're smaller, and they tend to have a broader range of themes.
But most of those are miserable.
Yes, yeah, I don't know. Yes and no. I think it's like I've compared like trad role-playing games is the mass market like comic book movie kind of thing. So indie role-playing games are the art house film. You know, 3 people have seen it and they're and it's very weird.
But those 3 people, they really,
but they
love
really,
it.
really, really love it. Yeah, and maybe it's maybe darker in tone sometimes. So the difference is the themes. There tends to be fewer mechanics. There's some games without any dice at all, and there are indie games with a GM, but there's more indie games. There's also lots of indie games without a GM. So in those kind of games sometimes get called story games, and that's a situation where every player also has some responsibility for defining the world. So it's not defining the world isn't in one person's role; it's in everyone's role. Yeah, so that's the sort of brief rundown of like tabletop role playing in some ways.
Yeah, and so with story gaming, there's immediately you can see the parallels with improv, and I think if you're doing trad gaming, it can still lead to improv potentially, but if you're already doing story gaming, it's only really a step away from.
Yeah, I think so. There is, to explain for the listeners, like every small culture, your nearest neighbour is your worst enemy. So there's this big sort of, in some ways, culture divide between trad and indie gamers. We like to bitch about each other a lot. But in reality, that's, I think, in terms of skill set and what you're doing, I think it's not that big a divide. And so one good place where sort of more traditional role playing overlaps with improv is the Jollyboat team. Made this show they call Role Play Cabaret, which is a sort of traditional GM'd adventure with basically them on stage being the GM and the audience as a whole sort of acting as a player. So they get to contribute things both in writing for the show, shouting out things, and also there's certain situations where you have 3 options, and you get coloured cards, and the audience votes on which option you take.
Wow, that sounds great.
So that's maybe an example of the overlap between
Yes.
improv and more traditional.
No, that's really cool. So did you skip over the trad gaming phase and go straight for indie?
So this is the original question. Actually, no, I did play one campaign of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
And that's a really hard edition to play.
No, well, yeah.
It is for someone that isn't very good with rules, I'm thinking of myself.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, 4th edition is very mechanical. In some ways, it's just very honest about what it's aiming to do.
It's a war game.
Yeah, but Dungeons and Dragons was originally a war game with the role playing, and I think even in other editions, I think that would be my critique of Dungeons and Dragons, is that the rules aren't actually written to do what it says on the box.
What is it promising and what is it not delivering then?
Well, it says it's a role playing game, but it's actually a war game.
Oh, right.
In the sense that all the rules are about how you resolved a combat situation.
Yes.
And the role playing is actually, I must say that there are some rules for like social interaction, I think, and social context. But mostly the role playing is just done by talking about it, and is done by the players rather than done by the rules. To try just sort of to build skills, and then I enjoyed it and realised it's like personally useful to me, and it's a different, like everyone, you just sort of fall into the world. I wouldn't say that in any scene that I'm involved in that I'm the most like hardcore person. So I'm not. So I'm not the kind of improviser that knows every improviser and everything. Nor the same about role playing games. I'm a dabbler naturally.
You straddle both worlds like a colossus.
Yeah, and I'm also involved in LARP as well. So a bit. Which is the other thing to talk about, maybe.
Yeah, cool, definitely. So you said that your first experience of improv was with Imprology.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
It's really nice. Yeah, I think Remy's doing really interesting things, and maybe a bit different from some of the other London schools.
Yeah.
His thing is all kind of focused on connection, really emotions, and less on the structural stuff. Well, he might have changed since I last took class with him, but that's his sort of focus. So yeah, it's good for like opening you up.
And have you done is it the Love Explosion night?
Yeah, I've been to those.
How does that work?
A few times. Yeah, so it's a participatory improv show. So everyone who goes along has to put their name in a hat. They pick out 2 names and you go on stage for 2 minutes and improvise something. So it's a jam, but you get a lot of people who've never done improv before, which is really nice. And the audience is also always really incredibly supportive because everyone knows that they're also going on stage. So it creates a really nice environment.
Yeah.
And it tends to be very different each month because you get different people and it changes the vibe.
Because I find jams terrifying. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I suppose I should be embracing that, but I just find it terrifying. I don't know what this person's going to do. Help!
Yeah, I think that's always like that's pure improv in some sense. There's like the challenge heightened. I think the only thing I find particularly about that night where you only tend to get one scene is that you sort of get in. You're not quite ready for it. You get into it, and then it's already over.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's true of all jams in some ways. Like, you don't get the time, but I think it is a good way of like challenging yourself to see if you can get yourself to improvise on command.
Too scared. Cool. So, were you with Imprology for long, or did you just do a term?
I did like 2 beginners, one beginners, 2 intermediate and advanced, and the advanced is the one with the show.
Oh, right.
So yeah, I went through the treadmill, as it were.
Right. And then you moved on to...
Who did I go to? The Nursery. I took a couple of courses, shortish courses with them. A scene work one and a long form one. And then, the other thing I did was the Hoopla. I did the long form narrative course with Steve.
And did you find, having come from, a story gang background, did that help you with improv, or did it just help you with narrative improv, or?
I think they are different things. So, in some ways, so it's complex to unpick in some ways. Tabletop is very different from LARP, and LARP is a lot more similar to improv. Because in tabletop you're not moving around, and you do experience emotions and you do emote, but maybe not as strongly. So a lot of the improv things of like around connection maybe don't apply. But as you said, all the narrative stuff still applies, of like keeping the focus, building the intensity, knowing where to push and where to hold back. So I think those skills definitely overlap in some ways. And RPGs, you're generally a bit more. You have more stuff. You're more supported. It's not just you on stage.
Hmm.
So that makes it a different experience as well.
Yeah, no, I can see that. You've mentioned Apocalypse World a couple of times. That seems to be... Maybe we could just sort of talk a little bit about that for people that haven't played it, because it seems to be the engine that a lot of other indie games also run off, or is that just my perception? There are a lot of Apocalypse World hacks out there, or is that...
Yeah, I think that's true.
What was it about that made it so hackable?
I think I don't. As I said, I'm not like the most well versed on RPG history, but yeah, it came along, made a big impression, and a lot of the people who played off that and adapted it for different settings. What we mean by hack in this case is that Apocalypse World, the game, is set in like a post-apocalypse setting, and it's sort of weird post-apocalyptic. And then other people have written other versions which change the setting. So a couple of popular ones. There's Monster Hearts, which is like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, teenage supernatural romance, and then there's Night Witches, which is something that came out fairly recently, which is World War II Soviet airwomen.
Oh, wow.
So to give a very brief overview of what Apocalypse World is it is a game with a GM. So there's one person sort of describing the world mostly, and then other people just playing one character generally. And the way it's structured is supposed to be sort of a conversation about what's happening in the fiction. So you just talk about things, and then there's each player character has a set of moves, sometimes specific to the type of character they're playing, and those moves have conditions, and when the condition is met, they kick in, and you roll some dice and result some things. And the GM player also has moves, and those moves are generally about making the players' lives worse.
It brings me back to the misery nature
Yeah,
of
it's
it.
just sort of, it's sort of...
it's narrative, isn't it? You can't have, you know...
It's a machine to keep the drama moving.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. You recently collaborated with the Nursery on Open Roads. Now, how did that come about? Because that came from gaming as well?
Yeah, so sort of, I feel both tabletop and LARP, they're sort of separate communities from Improv in some ways. There is some crossover, but in some ways it's something unknown or separate from the Improv community.
Did you move into LARP before you did the Nursery?
Yeah.
Should we talk about the LARP stuff and then that feeds in, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Because I know there's Nordic LARPs, is that right? And then is there American ones as well? Can't remember what the definitions are.
Sure. So just to recap, so LARP is live action role playing. Apparently now you should write LARP as a word itself. It's
Really?
place. Just
Yeah, it's good to know.
to clarify. And it actually, I think, originally evolved out of tabletop, of people dressing up as like Lord of the Rings characters and running around the woods. So it's role playing where you're inhabiting the characters. In some ways, it's like improv, but without an audience there.
Right.
That's an interesting thing to talk about maybe at some point.
Mm.
So again, it's similar. The difference between the mainstream and underground in LARP is with everything else. So most LARP is lots of people in the woods hitting each other with foam swords.
D6 damage, D6 damage, D6 damage.
Yeah. Doing fantasy type stories.
Have you done that side of it as well?
No, I haven't actually.
You skipped the trad LARPing, went straight to the indie LARPing.
Yeah. And then there's something called Nordic LARP. It's also some kind called progressive LARP, sort of evolved in the Nordic countries. And again, that's comparable to sort of MD tabletop, so more diverse sort of set of themes. and maybe less rules. And yeah, it's sort of the indie art house thing. And then the American thing you were talking about was probably American freeform.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of.
So this is another thing which is sort of, it's a very loose thing, but it's something that crosses between tabletop and LARP. So an example might be the rules involve like standing up and moving around. You can't play it at a table, but maybe you're not inhabiting one character. Maybe your role is like more generic than that. Maybe you're just narrating the story rather than acting it out.
Yeah.
So it's something that sort of sits between the two in some ways.
Wow. So what direction did you go in, and how did you get into it?
So I think the first LARP I ever played, so there's a performance artist called Adam James,
Right.
who got involved and found out about LARPing and got involved about it. And he ran a set of games for the public, Proud Artist, all from this book of LARPs called LARPs from the Factory. And so I think the first game I played was with him, which was A Mother's Heart. That's the name. Yeah, it's a sort of a game where sort of a Kafkaesque game where you put on trial a woman or a player for being a bad mother.
Really? Shouldn't laugh.
Yeah. So I think that was the first thing I played, and then I think there's sort of less of a regular scene in London, but that's changing now. So I've played a few games in London, and then this year I think was the year I got more involved. So I went to this conference called, I'm going to pronounce this badly, Knupunkt, which is a Nordic LARP conference,
right.
And it moves between different countries each year in the Nordic countries. And so I played a LARP there, and also there's lots of talks and workshops.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great atmosphere, and it's a great thing. And I think it would be, I'd encourage improvisers to check it out. The next one, because it's changed country, it's changed language, so the next one is actually called Sumulkuta, and it's happening in March, actually on a cruise ship, which is the first year they've tried it, going between Stockholm, I think, and Helsinki. So check it out, because I think a lot of stuff is relevant to improvise, and you're laughing a lot. I'll keep going.
Just I don't know why I find it so funny, but I think I find it funny because it sounds like, does this sound likely? I mean, obviously I know it's the truth. It's like, well, there's not any role playing, but then there's indie role playing, and then there's kind of like there's a LARP version of indie role playing, and then we do it in the Nordic countries, and it's on a boat.
Yeah,
this keeps changing because it's in a different country every year.
Yeah, so this is basically, it's the big Nordic LARP conference, that's sort of big in their scene. So it's a really interesting place to go to, because a lot of the stuff is on techniques for creating and playing characters, which is obviously relevant for improv.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth checking out, and it's a very inclusive environment, so it's worth checking out even if you're not a Nordic LARPer, is what I'm saying. And then the other thing that I did this year was I played my first big multi-day immersive LARP, and it's a game called Just a Little Loving, which has been run 5 times actually, and I played it this year. It's about broadly about the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and the impact it had on the gay community, and it's also about the alternative America, spiritual community in the 80s as well.
Whoa, that sounds like a lot of ground to cover, I suppose, in a day. So how did that day work? Where was it? How was it organised? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so it took place in Denmark in this sort of holiday camp place. It took place over a week. So there was some introduction, some workshopping. So LARP like Nordic LARP generally includes workshopping, which is sort of things like improv games to get you to warm up and connect and be in the right headspace. So it was some of that. Then there was 3 days of the game. So basically there was 3 acts representing the years 1982 to 1984.
Yeah.
Each act was from 5 p.m. in the evening to 11 a.m. the next morning.
Wow.
And then, 12 a.m. And then between there was a bit of debrief and rest, and then some further debrief, the last one. And then basically the conceit of the LARP was that this was 3 4th of July parties held in like Saratoga and upstate New York over these 3 years.
Yeah.
And as the AIDS crisis was going on, people were dying, and that was having an impact on the community.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a massive headfuck and probably changed my life.
Yeah.
So.
No, that sounds amazing. Even the idea I find it slightly terrifying, but mainly amazing. It's like, just I don't know, having that shared created universe for that period of time. Yeah, I can imagine it must be life changing.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing about LARP is partly is the effect of removing the audience.
Yes.
So there's less things to remind you. This is fiction.
Right.
And so, especially if you do it over a long period of time, and it's immersive environment, so there's costumes and so on.
Yes.
You get more towards the possessive element.
Right.
And there's some. I went to an interesting talk at Canoe Punk about the overlap between sort of LARP and shamanistic possession.
Brilliant.
So in these big games, and I definitely had it in Just a Little Loving, you have moments where you suddenly realise it's all fiction.
Yeah.
And it's very, very, very strange.
Wow. That sounds amazing. I had not considered the crossover between LARPing and the shamanic experience.
I think that, and for me, those and improv and all those kind of things, I think it's sort of, that's why they work in some ways, in the sense that they're tapping on, this must be some element of human beings, or the nature of human beings, or the nature of how mind works, that we can improvise, and then we can create fictions, and then we can operate in different headspaces. And for me, that's something those kind of practices tap into, that is the common root with shamanism, and is the reason why these practices are everywhere and have always existed.
So, by shamanism, is your definition travelling to another realm and then returning with an answer or some sort of wisdom, or is that...
Yeah, no, sorry, I think I've just realised I've used the wrong word. The right word is probably ritual.
Right.
Or imagination. Sort of all these kind of... I think it is... Yeah, the right word is ritual.
Right.
Of being in a separate, different space. And your perception of things maybe changes, and your perception of reality maybe changes within that space.
Yes. Oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to go away and think about that.
Because the other thing, the other really cool thing that I did at Moonpunct was on the Saturday night during the party, we did this. Apparently, it's like, I think it's the Norwegians. Apparently, this is a thing that they always do, these big rituals. But basically, we did this sort of improvised shamanic type group ritual.
Yeah.
With I think 100 people or something. And yeah, it was a really interesting head state to be in, that sort of pure, very intense like group mind head state of that you sometimes get in improv, that things are happening and you feel part of it, but you don't necessarily feel in control. It feels very automatic, that you're all like moving together.
So what were you doing when you were in this ritual?
Just making noises,
Yeah.
making movements, like moving around in circles,
Yeah.
like clapping, shouting things. Sort of just as you might imagine in like an improv game.
Yeah.
But yeah, played with 100 people. So there's a LARP writer and academic called Erik Fatland. I think he started it actually, this particular ritual, but he does it a lot, I think, or writes about it. There's some notes on his website about how you might do this, and it's something I did with the Open Roads cast. We sort of improvised like an initiation ritual,
Right.
which is like something I threw in just as an attempt of a way of like bonding the cast,
Yeah.
a bit more, like making them feel like a group.
Cool. So let's talk about that. And so was it the call for original formats that the Nursery sent out that you responded to, or how did you get involved?
How did I get involved? So the origin story is Open Roads is an improvised road trip movie driven by audience song suggestions. And the format is an adaptation of an existing story game called Ribbon Drive by Avery McDonald. And as I said, I have this idea that maybe things from LARP and improv, LARP and RPGs maybe add a different element to improv, and maybe it's worth exploring what can be brought across, particularly in terms of more structured formats. So I had this idea of like, what would happen if you played Ribbon Drive on stage? Could you make a show out of it? I did a few workshops on it, and was sort of wondering what the next step was going to be.
So you ran some workshops on it?
Yeah, just
So
trying it out.
So how did those workshops? How did the workshops work? What did you do in those?
Yeah, so this Open Roads project, or the first project, I just wanted to see, can we make Ribbon Drive the game into a show? So it was just basically playing it and figuring out what we needed to change to make it work on stage. And that sort of the early stages of the process. So I had a point where I thought, okay, this idea actually has some legs. Then I was thinking, like, how do I get this to a stage? And then that's when I found out about this Nursery Originals program.
Oh, cool. So how does Ribbon Drive the game work? And then I'd be interested to know what you had to change to make it into a show.
Sure. So Ribbon Drive is a game. It's actually a tabletop game. So you traditionally play it sit around a table. You can also play it as a LARP. I think it works in some ways as arguments for playing it as a LARP. It's a bit more powerful. It's supposed to tell like a indie road trip movie story, like Y tu mamá también, or Little Miss Sunshine is actually a great example as well. The way you play that game is you make music mixtapes beforehand. Ideally, each player makes a mixtape of music. Each mixtape has like a common theme around it. It's quite a fun activity to do. And you bring those along, and then you listen to the first two songs, and the first two songs sort of give you an overview of the story. Specifically, the first song is about where you as a group are going on this road trip and why.
Right.
So you listen to that song and then brainstorm around and decide where and why you're going.
So are you taking the mood of the music, the content of the lyrics, or just anything from the song that you get from the song?
Anything.
It's like asking for a call out, but you have the song and then you build from that. Yeah.
You listen to it. Traditionally, you listen to it in silence and then build from there. And I think music is a good source of inspiration for these kind of things, because it's like the right amount of detail. As in, it's not overly prescriptive, but it does give people a lot of things and gives people a lot of ideas, so you don't have like this blank state problem. So you do that, and then you listen to the second song, and the second song tells you more about the characters. And I won't talk too much about the rules, but I think so. The sort of core rule of what makes Rhythm Drive and Open Roads work is each character has a future, which is something that might happen in the character's future. Like, I will fall in love, I will go back to law school and get my degree, those kind of things.
Lovely. Yeah.
And it's those kind of things that you see resolved in this traditional road trip movie. So, Little Miss Sunshine, it might be like, I want to win this pageant, something like that. And then the point is that the game and the story is about whether those things come true for the character,
All right.
or whether the character stops caring about them, or they don't happen. And it's a sort of a if no, yes no question for each character.
Cool. So you ran some workshops on the game. This was with gamers, or was this with improvisers?
Improvisers, yeah.
With
So
improvisers.
it was workshop specifically looking at, can we make this a show, basically.
Ah, cool. And then once you kind of worked out that you could, that's when the Nursery opportunity came along and you got involved with them, is that right?
Yeah. So the Nursery is doing this thing sort of inspired by the Hideout Theatre in Austin, where they want to expand what the range and style of improv is in London. So they're running this program called Nursery Originals, whereby you pitch a show to them. Unfortunately, pitches for next year have just closed recently, and if they accept your pitch, they're doing like one season. Then you get some rehearsal space, some help with auditioning, and importantly, you get show dates at the Edric Centre.
So when you pitched it, what form did that take? Did you have to go along and, was it written, did you have to go along and explain your idea, or?
Yeah, it's just a written application on the website and then a phone call afterwards. Yeah.
Cool. So can you tell me about the audition process? Were you looking for particular things, or were you just seeing, I don't know, how did that work?
Yeah, so then the thing I should say now is that through the originals process, I also got a co-director, Luke Behan, who's a great improviser, and yeah, we had a call out. We figured out who we wanted to audition. Then the audition process was like a set of games where focusing on things we thought would be important.
Improv games or role-playing games?
Improv, yeah. So it was all improv. So it was also
Yeah.
aiming at the show, and yeah, it was an interesting process. So it was like the first ever improv audition I'd been to, and I was running it, helping run it with Luke. So that was interesting process to go through. But yeah, I think we were just looking for the people who were doing the right kind of improv. I think for Open Roads, I think one thing that we felt was important that it's not. It can be funny, but it's not necessarily a comedy show.
Yeah.
So people interested in that kind of improv, and people who are emotionally expressive and so on. But yeah, it was. We got a lot of good people, so it was kind of hellish having to make the decision.
God, yes, I can imagine. So once you got your team together, how long were you rehearsing for? Was it a couple of weeks or?
Well, 4 weeks. Yeah,
4 weeks.
Twice a week.
Right. Okay. I don't know whether that sounds a lot. That doesn't sound a lot.
No, just 8.
Yeah.
It's not a lot, but yeah, it was. I think what helped us is that we actually changed the format during the rehearsal, actually, but we had sort of a vision for the show, and we were going somewhere, I think, so that helped, I think, and that we had really good people as well.
Yeah,
we do have really good people.
So, so what did you have to change from the game to make it the show?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion point. So, I think one big thing is that in role-playing games and in LARP, there's opportunities to break character.
Yeah.
And also in tabletop role-playing games, there's lots of opportunity to write things down. So in Ribbon Drive, each character has 2 features, and you also want to remember the other character's features because you can. An important point is like your character pressing on them to help them resolve it.
Right. Yeah.
But it turns out improvisers can't remember 8 things. Like, it's really difficult. And even actually remembering 4 things in the moment
Yes.
is pretty difficult. So that was one interesting thing. And then obviously we had to change sort of the setup process. Like listening to the whole song and then brainstorming it isn't really an attractive thing to happen on stage.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a style difference between RPGs and improvisers. So people will throw cabbages at me for saying this, but I tend, partly from the experience of running Ribbon Drive after I'd done some of the show rehearsals, like role-playing gamers tend to prefer to work some more stuff out before the scenes,
Right,
of who their character is, and they're more averse to starting from a completely blank state. Whereas improvisers hate that. They just want to start and do it in motion. So we adapted the setup process to make it more attractive.
Sort of to simplify it so that the improviser didn't have to remember quite so many things when they were performing.
Yeah, to reduce the number of features and then change that. And then I think other interesting things we found is that with Open Roads we went with explicitly framed scenes.
All right.
So what I mean by that is that in a lot of improv shows you would just walk on stage and start miming things and grab people. So if you wanted to set the next, if you felt you wanted to set the next scene in the kitchen, you would just try and start miming kitchen things and hope you get a kitchen scene.
Yes.
With Open Roads, we've done like explicit flaming, and again, that's something that is generally done in LARP and role-playing games, whereby one person comes up and says, "We were in the kitchen," and then you start the scene.
Yeah, I quite like that. I quite like the economy of it, and as an audience member, I don't mind that I haven't had to work out where we are, and if I've been told where I am, I don't know, I quite like that. I think that's quite a nice thing to do.
Yeah, I think it was maybe. I think in the process of doing it in rehearsal, I realised maybe that's something that happens less in improv, but I think it works well. I think in some ways it's necessary for Open Roads because you're sort of, the characters are on this journey. The number of places the next scene could be is a bit more restricted,
Right.
to keep it all together.
Yes.
Make it make sense.
Yes. So, but if it's restrictive, is there then a need to actually say that we are in this place? Is it not easier for everyone to work out where we are?
Yeah, no, I realised I made that point, and after I said it, I wasn't clear in my head of what I meant. But I think it's just useful, I think. We found it useful in the show to be explicit, like where we are in the journey and what kind of location. And I think it also played well because you can sort of use it to angle things in the scene as well.
Yeah.
So you can say, I think we had one point someone say, they were back in their car on the road talking about their previous relationships.
Oh, right,
so you can use it to angle the scene in a certain direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really powerful thing to do. And you've mentioned before about one of the differences between role-playing and improv being the audience. So obviously you had an audience for Open Roads. aside from not being able to listen to the songs all the way through and brainstorm, did that also change the way in which the story was told?
Yeah, I think maybe if I talk about it generally rather than with respect to Open Roads, I think it's really interesting distinction coming down to what an audience exactly is. And recently I was helping Adam James run something called, what he called this time, the Beholder Controller, which was like sort of kind of an improv game of creating some creatures which are made up of several people moving together,
Right.
and then the creatures interact. And he's run it a lot of times. He's run it for Tate a lot, but we ran it at the 176 Gallery the other week, and it's the first time he'd ran it, like doing the creature creation process and so on in public. So there were people playing this game, but there were other people walking around and viewing the art.
Right.
And the interesting thing is that it didn't feel like a performance, and the people afterwards reported that they felt okay with like doing that, like making all these silly noises and funny motions. Whereas I feel like if you'd put them on a stage, that the atmosphere would be different. For me, and I think that's an interesting distinction maybe between what someone observing something and like an audience member. And I think my current tack on this, partly driven by things Erik Fatland said, is that actually an audience is like another role in the game.
Yeah.
It's not just like a person, but it's a person with a specific role, because there are things that they can do, like talk or walk about, which will earn them derision. Like they're not supposed to do those things.
Yeah.
And so that it's sort of a ritualistic role thing, that they have this role, and that when you're performing, you're being defined as being looked at. So that changes things. And I think the fundamental thing that changes is like the feeling. There's a sort of feeling of being on stage, maybe sort of slightly pressurized, nervous feeling, maybe.
Yeah.
That you feel that you don't have when you just do LARP. And your head accelerates, like, 30 seconds feels like 30 minutes.
Yes.
When you're in that head state. And again, that's an aspect of being a performer on stage and being in that space. So that changes. And then I think the other difference with LARP, it's not so much with tabletop, is that in LARP, one of the things they say is that the audience is in everyone's head. So there's not necessarily one cohesive and coherent story.
Mm.
So, for instance, this game I played called Just a Little Loving, there was 60 people playing. So it was like being at a party. So there were, some people I had a lot of interaction with and I knew well, and I knew a lot of their story. Other people I never really interacted with, and they had an entirely separate experience.
Yes.
Maybe you can get that sometimes in some like immersive theatre stuff. And I think immersive theatre is also an interesting attack on it, because it is like LARP in the sense that you're in this environment. It's an immersive environment. You're moving around, and you're not just sitting there watching something.
Mm.
But it is definitely theatre in the respect that something is being performed to you.
Yes.
You're not participating. And also the feeling, you feel that the actors are in a different space or on a different level to you, and then there's like a feeling of separation.
Mm. Yes.
That you feel like you're an audience member.
Yes. No, it's really interesting. Okay, final question. You mentioned at the beginning that role-playing, you said that it had personal benefits, it changed your life. How's role-playing No, sorry, that's my mistake. In my mind, improv and role playing are the same thing, and so quite often
Yeah.
I switch between the two. So what I meant to say was improv. Either improv or role playing. How have they changed your life?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways. I think in improv classes, I tend to feel there's sort of two types of people. There's like people who have creative day jobs, who like actors, comedians, who are taking this as like training to help them in auditions or whatever, and people who in their day jobs don't improvise at all and are taking it as like personal skills building, so like tech people. And I am, spoiler, a tech person. So I think it's very useful for like soft skills and connection related things, and the ability to like throw yourself in without necessarily having planned it all out. I think that improv is really helpful for those things. And I think in the role-playing side of things, I think the most life-changing thing was probably this laugh I was talking about, just a little loving. I think what was impactful about that is to sort of go through the experience of like being a doomed generation in some sense.
Yeah.
And knowing that a lot of your friends are probably going to die, and when you're in LARP, that's a very real feeling of going through that without having anyone I know actually die.
Yes.
I think it's a very valuable experience.
That sounds brilliant. Right. Well, on the subject of all our friends dying, I think we should probably leave it there.
Okay, cool.
That's a proper indie RPG way of finishing it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I made this.
That's improv!